So in this tutorial, we're going to look at a few of the most commonly used curve operations in Grasshopper. So I'll start by just making a curve in Rhino, and then we'll bring this curve into Grasshopper. And the first one we'll look at is the rebuild curve. So rebuild curve is located under curve utilities. A lot of these are located under curve utilities, and there's some more in here, so just feel free to look through there. But the first one that we'll do is rebuild curve. So you plug the curve into the C, and then we need the degree of the curve. So degree, if we go from, let's go from 1 to 3, you can see what that does. And then also the number of control points on that curve. So we can really change the number of points along that curve, and it doesn't matter how many we started with. So we'll do 2 is less than 20. Plug that into rebuild. So if I just hide the original curve so we can see this better, this is the original curve, so it's a very smooth NURBS curve, but using rebuild I can actually turn it into a polyline essentially by changing the degree to 1, so that makes it a straight line curve. If I turn this off, you can see that, and then you can actually change the numbers, so it can be more precise or less accurate depending on how many numbers you put into the count here. You can also, of course, keep it as a 3-degree curve, which it originally was, and you can see this is really good. Like if you bring in a curve from another program, like a topography, for example, that has a lot of curves along it, or points along it, you can rebuild those curves and make them a little simpler. It'll lose a little bit of the accuracy, as you can see, but depending on how many number of control points you put in, you can make it more or less accurate. So that's a really useful one. The other thing you can do is fill it. So let's just go ahead and keep this as a polyline like curve, and you can do a fillet. So you can fill it or add a radius to these very sharp angles here using the fillet component. So you can also find this, by the way, under utilities. So we'll just use this first fillet, and then you plug the curve into there, and then you add a radius for the fillet. So we'll just do a slider. 1 is less than 20.00. Plug that into radius, and you can see it'll add a radius at all of those sharp angles. So that's a really nice way to make a kind of curve that's simplified but also uses a fillet to create some curvilinear parts to it. The next one we're going to do is offset. So we'll just keep using the same original curve. I'll turn that back on, and then we'll find the offset curve component, and then plug your curve into the curve input. You then have the distance of the offset. So we will offset this one. Let's do a slider. 1 is less than 20.00. Plug that into distance. And then you'll notice the other thing you can do, if I double click on the slider, let's actually change the minimum to -20. So that way you can see that a negative number will offset in one direction, a positive number will offset in the other direction. So that's the offset. You can also offset it with corners, or so for example, if I right click on this and say round, for example, it'll often round those corners. But the next one we can do is, so that would work on a closed shape, by the way. The next thing we can do is a tween. So if I draw another curve out here, and let me give this one just a little more three-dimensionality, so I'll move some of these control points up and down. Let's bring that curve in. Set one curve. Let's go ahead and delete this one. Type in tween curve. So it basically makes an average between curve A and curve B. And you can see that would be the average curve between those, and it puts it right in the middle there. The tween is really nice because you can actually produce a series of tweens along between these two curves, and to do so you can use what's called the range component. So the range is basically a range of numbers within a domain, so we can choose how many of these tweens we want. So let's go from 1 is less than 20, plug that into the number we want, and then we can plug that into the factor. So we can see that then produces that many averaged curves between those two curves. By the way, the factor, if you just want to do a slider from like 0 less than 1, you can actually just do an average curve, and it can be anywhere in between those two curves. So if it's closer to the curve B, you could keep it over here. If it's closer to curve A, you can keep it over there. But these two are really nice ways to produce a tween between two curves. Okay, the next one we're going to use is blend curve. So for blend curve, I'm going to create, I'll use this, this curve here, but I'm going to create one additional new curve. And let's just do a curve that's out here. I'll plug this curve in. It's similar to fillet in some ways, but it creates a more smooth transition between one curve and another curve. So it'll basically create a segment between these curves that smooths that out as if it was all one curve. So we'll go ahead and set that curve. Let me hide both of these, and then let's use the blend curve component. With the blend curve, you just plug in first curve to A, second curve to B. Now here's a good thing that happens frequently, which is that it always goes from the end point of one to the start point of the other. So if you actually wanted it to go between these 2 points, all you have to do is flip one of the curves. So I'll use the flip curve, plug in this curve here, and then use the flipped curve as curve B, and you can see it then puts that segment where I was expecting it to be. You can change different factors here, so you could try sliders with for bulge A and bulge B, and that'll just kind of change how it's creating that smooth transition curve. The last one I want to show is the geodesic. So for this one, we'll just go ahead and delete all of these. I'm just going to go to the front view and create a very quick surface. In my perspective view, I'm going to move this one over here. I'll just loft these. And then let's bring in the surface. Set one surface. Go ahead and hide it. And then we'll just do 2 points. Let's bring in these points. Okay, now we're going to use our geodesic component. And for the geodesic, you basically plug in the surface and then the start point and an end point, and it'll create a line on the surface between those 2 points. So you can see it basically projects the points, it takes the point and puts the point on the surface closest to the surface, and then creates a line on the surface between those 2 points. So this would be really cool if you have like a pattern and start to produce a bunch of these along a surface.